This is Sean O'Malley, and you're watching Full-Time MMA. Don't be a bagel biting, bagel bitch boy, bagel bitch back.
Back to the daily grind, and shout out to the full-time patrons. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back bagel biting bitch boy, because you know what time it is. It's full-time
MMA.
And it is time to break down the 4-fight UFC Fight Pass main card. Mark Hunt versus Oleinik, UFC's debut in Russia, UFC Moscow. Gonna be a fun fight card. I didn't even realize the entire card was on Fight Pass until I looked at the top of this right here where it says UFC Fight Pass main card. I just broke down the early Fight Pass prelims. And you can check those out, of course, over on patreon.com/fulltimemma. Go check out the Full-Time Dojo. We break down the full main card, the early prelims, the whole fight card, man. Also, betting advice, everything over there. So check out the Full-Time MMA Dojo for sure. But let's break down this 4-fight main card. Starting off, we got a good fight. I mean, let's get right into it. We got Santiago, UFC veteran. He's going to be taking on a very dangerous, undefeated Alexei Kunchenko. Holy smokes, I know my boy MMA Bud's going to be excited for this fight. A lot of these guys coming over from Fight Nights Global and some of these other promotions that don't get as much shine, some of these Russian promotions just around the world. A lot of these, there's some good fighters out there that aren't in the UFC that we don't know about quite because they're not in that mainstream, you know, as far as what we're used to watching, not even in Bellator. But this guy, Alexei Kunchenko, I'm actually picking him to get the W, as you can see. Even if you might not know who he is, let me break it down for you. Alexei is undefeated at 18-0, coming over to the UFC as the M1 welterweight champion. Thiago Alves, UFC veteran, he's 1-3 in his last 4 fights, most recently losing a second-round KO TKO to Curtis Molinder. I'm going to give the edge in this fight to the undefeated M1 champion. He's 18-0. He's been fighting tough guys outside the UFC. Now he's taking on an experienced veteran. But Thiago Alves has been around kicking ass in the UFC for a long time, but I would still argue is past his prime. So with that, it's going to be a tough fight for Thiago. He'll be the first fighter to beat Alexei Kunchenko if he can manage to do it. Alexei's won 13 of his 18 fights by way of knockout or TKO. So, and also he's fought multiple 5-round fights. So his cardio's not in question in this 3-round fight either. So, with that being said, giving the edge to Alexei Kunchenko to remain undefeated, move to 19-0. Also, he'll have the home crowd on his side for what that's worth. You know, maybe, you know, when he lands a shot, the crowd reacts. Maybe it affects the judges. Maybe it doesn't. Either way, fighting, he'll have the crowd on his side. So, moving on to the next fight, we got a heavyweight bout. Number 12th ranked heavyweight in the world, Andrei Arlovski, taking on the number 14th ranked heavyweight in the world, Shamil Abdurakhimov. This is a tough fight to call because Andrei Arlovski has actually looked great in his last 3 fights, beating Junior Albini, Stefan Struve, and arguably Tai Tuivasa. He did a lot better against Tai Tuivasa than some might have expected, but before those fights, he was losing to the higher level heavyweights, riding a 5-fight losing streak, but he's shown he can definitely still beat you if you're not ready for the top 15, top 10 of the heavyweight division. Shamil Abdurakhimov is only 2 years younger than Arlovski, and he has a lot less UFC experience, but he is coming off of a first-round KO TKO over Chase Sherman. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to knock out the experienced Pitbull Andrei Arlovski, so I'm going to give the edge to the Pitbull to get the W. I don't think Shamil's done enough to prove he's a top 10 fighter, and I feel like Andrei Arlovski is like the gatekeeper to the top 10. Andrei Arlovski, if he can avoid the knockout, he can likely outpoint Abdurakhimov en route to a unanimous decision. Can't be too confident in that pick, but I'm definitely giving the edge to the Pitbull Andrei Arlovski. Moving on, we got 2 more fights to break down, full-time family. The number 4th ranked light heavyweight in the UFC, Jan Blachowicz, taking on Nikita Krylov, who's returning to the UFC. Krylov finished 5 fights in a row before having that 5-fight finishing streak snapped in the first round with a submission loss to Misha Serkinov back in 2016. But Nikita Krylov is only 26 years old with 29 pro fights, 24-5. He's never been to a decision, win or lose, in all 29 of those fights, finished all 24 wins, and he's also in all 5 of his losses, those were finishes. Never been to a decision, so he's very dangerous, and young. But he's fought in the UFC previously. He's now making his return to the UFC. He was 5-1 before leaving the UFC. He had that 5-fight finishing streak, lost 1 fight, and then he actually left. I don't know if his contract was up. I think it was. So he went to fight for, I believe, Fight Nights Global, and he was that was big for the UFC because the light heavyweight division hasn't been too stacked, and you know, he was a dangerous contender and a definitely up-and-coming contender for this division. So it's good to see he's returning, much needed for this light heavyweight division. But this light heavyweight division is quickly going from one of the least stacked divisions to having a lot of great fighters up here, and especially with the return of Krylov. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening in this light heavyweight division. You know, it's definitely getting fun again. So he's returning after he left the UFC. He won 4 fights in a row, getting back to his finishing ways. Now he's returning against the top 5 ranked Jan Blachowicz. Jan Blachowicz is currently riding a 3-fight winning streak with wins over Devin Clark, Jared Cannonier, and most recently a very impressive unanimous decision over Jimmy Manuwa. This is a tough fight to call because Krylov, of course, outside the UFC, hasn't been fighting the same caliber competition, but he's still been fighting experienced guys, and he's also very dangerous. He's never been to a decision, like I said, in his 29 fights. Of his 24 pro wins, 10 of those are KO TKOs, 14 of them are by submission, so he's well-rounded. And like I said, although not recently fighting in the UFC, his opponents were experienced, and he finished them all. So Blachowicz looked amazing against the dangerous striker Jimmy Manuwa, also Jared Cannonier. But before his 3-fight winning streak, which he's looked impressive, he did have a loss to Patrick Cummins, you know, pretty one-sided before getting on this winning streak. And so with that loss, and you know, I still kind of want to give him the edge because what he's been doing in the top, you know, with that win over Jimmy Manuwa, and he was in the top 10 before that. Very impressive win there. But Krylov is dangerous. He's young. He's experienced. He's returning to the UFC. I mean, both of these guys have the same amount of fights, and they both have 29 pro fights, and Blachowicz is 9 years older. So, you know, he's younger, almost more experienced. It's the same amount of experience, but a lot younger. So at that age, he'll definitely have more fights. So, you know, if you're scaling up either way, I'm giving the edge to the young, well-rounded finisher Nikita Krylov making his return to the UFC. I think he gets the job done. We'll see, man. It's going to be good to see him return into action, though, in the UFC for sure. Now we've got to break down the main event. That's the last fight for us to break down. Mark Hunt versus Alexei Oleinik, number 8th ranked heavyweight, taking on the number 11th ranked heavyweight in the world. Mark Hunt, 13-12-1 in his professional career, 8-6 in the UFC, taking on Alexei Oleinik, who is 56-11-1. That's 68 pro fights, 5-2 in the UFC, man. Alexei Oleinik, with all that experience, he's 3-1 in his last 4 fights in the UFC with wins over Victor Pesta, Travis Brown, and most recently Junior Albini, all by way of submission. And with all that experience, he's actually 3 years younger than Mark Hunt at 41 years old. But he's got close to 3 times the fight experience. He's got 68 pro fights to Mark Hunt's 26. So he's close to having 3 times the amount of experience as Mark Hunt, and he's also 3 years younger. So Mark Hunt, still he's a fan favorite. He's coming into this fight, I believe, as a slight favorite. He's earned the respect of the MMA fans with his fan-friendly style and his stand-up acumen, earning KOs in 10 of his 13 fights, 10 of his 13 wins. But his 12 losses, 6 of those have came by way of submission. And that could very well come into play in this fight. Alexei Oleinik, very dangerous with the submissions and the grappling. I mean, he's going to have to figure out how to get the fight to the ground. But I'm going to give the edge to Alexei Oleinik. I think he's got a real chance to win this fight. He's fighting at home. He's a younger, more experienced, well-rounded fighter. Mark Hunt can definitely win this fight if he can avoid being taken down each round. But Alexei also has 8 wins by way of KO TKO. So he'll be able to hold his own on the ground, even though he was getting clipped up by Junior Albini. You know what I'm saying? That's when he decided he had to take the fight to the ground and like pulled Ezekiel choking and locked it up. Pulled guard, got that Ezekiel choke, locked it in. So it wasn't a traditional takedown. It was an interesting way. I don't know if he'll be able to do that to Mark Hunt, but as long as he can get the fight to the ground, I think Alexei Oleinik will be able to win the fight that way. But if Mark Hunt can keep the fight standing, I wouldn't be surprised if he came out here and got this win either. So that being said, that's the breakdown of UFC Moscow. Fight Pass, it's going to be on Fight Pass. the main card, the prelims, everything. Either way, it's going to be a great card. That being said, it is what it is. Let the full-time family know what you think. What are your predictions in the comments?
Da 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 da! It's the motherfucking DOG.